Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Welcome to Home Bible Ministry. My name is Wayne Worry, and this is broadcast number 204. And today we're continuing our series of inspirational messages. And the title of today's message is Moses is Dead. All right? Now, from Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 and 2, we read, Now after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spake unto Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' minister, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. As I was with Moses, so will I be with thee. I will neither fail thee nor forsake thee. Okay? So Moses had led the children of Israel for 40 years because of their rebellion at Kadesh Paran. In Numbers 14 we read, And your children shall wander in the wilderness 40 years, and bear your whoredoms until your carcasses be wasted in the wilderness. So, until they wandered in the wilderness, until only their descendants, okay, those that were 20 years and under 20 years of age, were the only ones that remained. Everyone 20 years and older died in the wilderness. So Moses was the only leader many of them had ever known. But Moses died before entering the land. He died because he disobeyed God at Meribah, where he struck the rock twice. And even though he didn't enter the land, for those 50 years old and younger, Moses had been the only leader they'd ever known. So Deuteronomy 34:5 says, So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. No more Moses. The mantle had been passed to Joshua. Deuteronomy 34:9, And Joshua, the son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands upon him. And the children of Israel hearkened unto him, and did as the Lord commanded Moses. So now we have a new leader, but the same direction. Joshua was not Moses. Joshua was not like Moses. Joshua would never be Moses. Okay? Now, let's look at his first commands. Joshua's first command to the people was, Prepare you victuals. Well, what are victuals? In Joshua 1:10 and 11, Then Joshua commanded the officers of the people, saying, Pass through the host, and command the people, Prepare you victuals, for within 3 days you shall pass over Jordan. Now, victuals are prepare food supplies, provisions to carry with them, okay? But can you imagine what was going through their heads? I mean, some of them probably didn't even know what that meant. Imagine the look on their faces. These people had been eating nothing but manna for 40 years, okay? And manna was only good for the day it was collected, 2 at most on the Sabbath. Exodus 16:35 says, And the children of Israel did eat manna 40 years until they came to the land inhabited. They did eat manna until they came to the borders of the land of Canaan. These people didn't grow crops. These people did not buy food from merchants. They did not forage or live off the land. The only thing they knew, they were fully dependent on the manna that fell every day. Okay? They didn't know anything about getting food for themselves. Joshua 5:11 and 12, and they did eat the old corn of the land on the morrow after the Passover, unleavened cakes and parched corn the selfsame day. And the manna ceased on the morrow after they had eaten the old corn of the land. So what happened? Well, they had to glean. They had to labor. They had to go out in the fields of the crops that had been harvested by the inhabitants of the land and pick up the scraps to make bread. Moses had never commanded that, and yet the people obeyed because they knew Joshua was appointed of God. Now let's look at Joshua's second command. His second command was to circumcise everyone. Well, wait a minute. Weren't they supposed to be doing that anyway? Well, Joshua 5:2. At that time the Lord said unto Joshua, make thee sharp knives and circumcise again the children of Israel a second time. Now it had all been done once before, but this was also something Moses had never commanded. The people were all uncircumcised. Well, how do you know that? Because Joshua 5:5 says, now all the people that came out of Egypt were circumcised, but all the people that were born in the wilderness by the way, as they came forth out of Egypt, them they had not circumcised. Okay? So they hadn't circumcised any of their children like they were supposed to for 40 years. None of these kids, I say kids because they were in their 50s, but none of the people had been circumcised because they knew, and yet the people obeyed because they knew Joshua was God's appointed. All right? Now, I say that to say all this. No pastor is forever. Okay? And I know some of you out there have had the same pastor for 40 years. But one day, that pastor will be replaced. God will appoint another. And that pastor will not be the same. He will do things differently. He will say things differently. He will lead you differently. But he is still God's appointed. And you are to obey and support him as long as that man is following biblical principles. You are to follow him, to obey him, and to support him. Different is not wrong. Okay? Most new things are not harder or more complicated. They're just different. Change, whether good or bad, is always difficult. It's always painful. But different just takes getting used to. Deuteronomy 34:8 says, and the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. So the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. Have your mourning and move on. Time changes, music changes, tastes change, people change, but God does not change. His direction does not change. His word, his will, and his way do not change. His shepherd selection criteria have not changed. Amen? So here's the deal. Rebellion against God's anointed only makes you the problem. Amen? If Moses is dead, then accept his new anointed and move on. That's the way it was always meant to be. Amen? Hey, thanks for tuning in. I pray you got a blessing from this message, and if you did, share it with others. Sometimes it's a hard pill to swallow when you get a new pastor. Pastors move on for one reason or another. Some of them, like I said, you may have had your pastor for 40 years, the only one you've ever known. And getting a new pastor is always hard, but it's not impossible. He will be different. He will talk different. He will expect different things from you. But remember, he is God's anointed. Amen? So take that ball and run with it. Have your morning and then move on. And thanks for coming. And we'll see you next time on Home Bible Ministry.